Hello, everyone. I'm Magdalene from ITIS Capital, and I'm delighted to welcome you all to our second quarter investor call 2020. Thank you all for joining the call. At this time, all our participants will be in listen-only mode, and after a presentation, we'll have the Q&A session. So today, our focus will be on the recent performance of the portfolio and an update in the market. With that, it's now my pleasure to turn the call over to Naveen Chandra Mohan, our CEO and Principal of ITIS Capital. Over to Naveen.
Thanks, Mag, for the kind introduction. I again take this opportunity to thank everyone for taking the time out to attend the call. The second quarter, predominantly March to June, has been an interesting time for all of us in the market. It has been characterized by an infusion of liquidity by central banks around the world, interest rate cuts to unprecedented levels, including India, and movement in stock prices in certain sectors that has been hard to fathom for many. Why do I say that? If one looks at the publicly listed tech companies in the US or China, it does feel like COVID never even happened. Back home in India, we are in the midst of one of the best quarterly returns in our indices since the global financial crisis. If I look at the performance of our portfolio through inception, the overall performance in 2020 year to date has been between Jan to June has been a positive one at ITIS, where we continue to outperform the index. Here again, we benchmark ourselves to the best performing index in the country for the time being, which is Nifty 50, by close to a healthy 20% in the year. Cumulatively, an original investor in ITIS since our beginning would have seen an excess return of close to 51% over the index. And the breakdown of this is given on a year-on-year basis against the index. We've generated a return of 17.2% IRR on an annualized basis since inception for investors. Over the same period, Nifty has annualized 6.2%. The mid-cap index has annualized 1.3%, and the small-cap index has annualized a negative 6.8%. This should give an investors an idea as to a portfolio when constructed with a sound philosophy. Investing is just not about mimicking or replicating an index. While ETF-based investing does offer an ease of access, the possibility of generating alpha in the Indian markets is a real one. One of the important things to do for every portfolio manager, at least for us at ITIS, is to break down the quality of our returns. Is to evaluate how consistently we outperform or underperform during both up and down markets. This slide shows how quarterly returns stack up during bull and bear markets. The role of the fund manager is not just about delivering returns when the market is up, but more importantly to protect the capital when the markets are down. Here, what we specifically talk about is the portion on the left talks about how ITIS has done, specifically when quarterly returns of the index are up. What is most stark is importantly how ITIS is done as a fund when the index returns are down. We've outperformed during 3 out of the 4 quarters, and the average outperformance has been close to 5%. It's important that a fund manager not just deliver excess returns during bull markets, but again, protect the capital during bear markets. No conversation with any fund would be incomplete unless and until one comments about the current market. Now, clearly, the current market is an extremely uncomfortable one. Today, a typical conversation with most investors that I talk to revolve around a feeling of discomfort with the market. Everyone that I talk to, be it fund managers or institutions or investors, is waiting for a correction, quote unquote, and in some cases a crash too. This time around, everyone wants to be buying a crash too, which was not the case even in April. The sentiment has clearly changed. In April, it was about a crash is certainly coming. Today, it's about a crash is coming, but I want to be buying that. The feeling that I get is very, very similar to my conversations with investors that I used to have back in November and December of 2019, last year, when we were discussing HDFC Bank. If you remember, HDFC Bank was close to a stock price was close to around 1,250, which is split, and HDFC Bank, like it does, was showing a growth rate of anywhere between 15 to 20% on a quarterly basis. Most investors who I spoke to back then mentioned to me that they wish that they could get an opportunity to buy the company sub 1,000. Now, it seems silly at that point of time to imagine HDFC Bank at a 20% lower level. And many said that it would happen around the time Aditya Puri was moving out, which was later this year. Now, luckily for them, as it always happens in the markets, this situation came about earlier through Corona. But again, as is the psyche of most investors, most of them could not buy it because it was uncomfortable. Banks were going through a huge crisis. They still are. We still are in the middle of a crisis in the banking environment, whether one acknowledges this or not. But buying HDFC Bank close to 15% lower than what they were expecting was uncomfortable at that point of time. And I always tell investors this: crashes in the market happen due to unknown risks, where market doesn't like uncertainty. Today, the risks that are highlighted are predominantly known risks. So most of the questions that I get around the market is, where is the growth? Fundamentals and business sentiments have not improved. The market is driven by liquidity. All of this implying the market is primed for the next crash. Banks clearly have a problem. I mean, there are add-on extensions to the same argument. Banks have a problem with the moratorium extension coming up. Obviously, we don't know the intricacies being, is the interest on interest going to be charged or is it going to be waived? US elections later this year pose a significant threat. Earlier this year, the approval ratings for Trump was fairly significant, but considering how US has been handling this entire situation, it may not be so obvious. So the risks and the scenarios that play out in the market are real. As a firm and fund, we've been aggressive in raising money in the last 3 months. The difficult part and the beauty of the fund management is the fact that it's always easier to raise money in the middle of a bull market, but the opportunity set is generally limited. It's much harder to raise money in an uncertain and turbulent market, but the opportunity set has always been significant there. Sitting today at a fund, we continue to be bullish in the portfolio companies, and we do believe an investor coming in today should compound money with a high probability in the high teens IRR over the next 3 years, considering where the liquidity in the market is and what kind of growth we see in the portfolio companies. We've always believed that liquidity is always driven markets, and it in turn changes the sentiment. Interest rates, like gravity, they are like gravity for the stock market valuations, whether one likes it or not. What that means is lower interest rates does prop up equity sentiment. It could be uncomfortable, but that's one needs to refine how you look at a particular business depending on the function of interest rates. And this also applies to businesses that are able to throw free cash flows because the cost of capital is significantly reduced. One thing that people need to understand is a correction in the markets can happen anytime. It's fortunately or unfortunately the inherent nature of equities. But the way I sit, from where I sit, the probability of crash that I attribute is very low. One of the things that is important to us as a firm is also to understand global sentiment and global flows. From where we see it, we've seen that in the last 3 months alone, US stock markets are functioning, or US capital markets are functioning in a zero rates environment, and the Fed has given a backstop of 150 billion per month. This has had huge inflows into tech-driven companies, and especially in a space that not many people follow, B2B SaaS-driven companies. In fact, the IPO market in the US is back in full flow. Believe it or not, in the middle of coronavirus, we've had significant number of IPOs in the last 2 months, and many of the companies are they are not companies that are without revenues. Many people again compare this valuation uptick in the tech to what happened in '99. And I think we are in a very, very significantly different market. Back then, there were companies with a .com status appended to them with no earnings. Today, we are talking about companies coming out with $10 to $15 billion valuations, generating significant revenues and free cash flow, many of them being profitable as well. China, not many people follow China. China, that from where we see it, is in the early stages of a bull market. Now, the thing about China is a very interesting market because you have a lot of companies with extremely low free float. And when China gets into a bull market, it generally goes into a euphoric market immediately after. The last time we saw the Shanghai composites actually go through such a state was between 97 and 2000, and the next one was between 05 and 08. In both of these occasions, the index went up 3x in 3 years. Clearly, I'm not talking about specific companies, I'm talking about the index going up 3x in 3 years, which clearly meant that specific companies would have gone up 40 to 100x, depending on which sector you're talking about. Now, if China actually is going through an early stage of a bull market, this has ramifications for EM flows, primarily because China is the world's still dominant emerging market country. And if you look at flows in the last decade, emerging markets have been one of the primary underperformers for fund flows, and US has been the beneficiary of this, considering it has been the best performing equity market in the last decade. With this as a background, I think it is appropriate that we give uh, an overview of the portfolio construction as we stand. Uh, we've been fairly positioned towards free cash flow driven companies and sectors, specific sectors that we have understood and that we have liked. Like I have emphasized in multiple one-on-one conversations, NBFC is a sector that we've avoided for the better part of 3 years. Our exposure in the banking and financial space has predominantly been in the private sector banks, also constituted towards HDFC Bank. One of the primary reasons that we've done well in 2020 has been our decent sized pharma exposure, and most of this came from in the CRMO and CDMO space through Syngene. In our latest quarterly newsletter, I briefly address our exposure in Syngene, why we've held through the exposure for a while now, and why it's been performing. And the way we see it, I look at this as a compounder for the next few years, considering the market in which it operates and considering the tailwinds that the company has from the space in which it operates. We also have financial exposure in the non-lending space. What I mean by the non-lending space, in the non-leverage space through AMC and the insurance businesses. And apart from that, we also have certain consumer-facing businesses. By now, people who attend our quarterly calls would have realized that our activity, we are not a high activity driven fund. If we look back at our portfolio churn in the last 3.5 years, on an average, it stood anywhere between 18 to 20%. For the new money that has come in, we've actually constructed a very similar portfolio. For specific portfolios in this quarter, we made a small investment into Indian Energy Exchange. The background behind this is it's a power exchange. The company was started back in 2008. Again, it's a proxy monopoly. We certainly believe that there are a huge number of tailwinds that are going on. In a market like India, if power has to get deregulated, and the fact that as a system we move from long-term PPAs into an exchange-based trading, which has its own efficiencies, we see IEX as a strong beneficiary in this space. We've maintained our exposure in financials, predominantly in the non-lending space. When I say non-lending space, in the non-leveraged institution space, which is basically not any company away from the NBFCs and private sector banks. We've also added a smaller exposure in Alkem Labs. Alkem Labs is a pharma company which is sold generics, formulations, and APIs. Market cap is north of $3 billion as we speak today. Here again, this is a company that we see having a decent amount of tailwinds in the space it operates. We've stayed away from pharma for a while in the generic space. our exposure has predominantly been in very niche pharma companies with a specific moat around the business. Here again, I think I want to highlight our portfolio positioning both historically and how it is today. Specifically today, we do not want any cyclical businesses in the portfolio. I think there is a case to be made for cyclical businesses to be cheap, but I certainly don't think that I want to own companies just because optically, from a valuation perspective, they look cheap, whether from a price to book or a price to earnings perspective. I want to see growth in the business predominantly from a free cash flow business, from a free cash flow perspective, and the ability for the business to reinvest that free cash flow, generating a return on capital over the cost of capital. We've avoided leverage in the balance sheet, and I think that has served us both during good times and bad. The portfolio has been tilted towards growth. It has been for a while. And we want to be investing in market leaders who have superior free cash flow generation capability. We've been cautious about investing in capex heavy businesses today. There is a case to be made from multiple investors or multiple portfolio managers around investing in capex heavy businesses because they are cheap. This is not a space that we are looking at or we are looking to go towards, unless and until the funding is from internal accruals. It's important, again, to differentiate between businesses that are making capex. So, for example, you still have some interesting pharma businesses that are making capex, or they have finished their capex cycle in the last 2 years. However, most of such businesses have had their capex getting funded from internal accruals, whereas some of the more manufacturing heavy businesses have historically generated their capex from debt and borrowings. And the latter is what we would avoid. Final thoughts. Again, I bring this up primarily because every conversation with an investor is about either when the next correction is coming. The answer to that could be any time because we're dealing with equities, or when the next crash is coming, for which my answer is the probability is low from where I sit. Markets certainly do not crash, or at least I have not seen it crash when majority of the investor base expects it. Valuations are expensive today, and there is no denying the fact that valuations are expensive. But I think one needs to set the context to that with the function of the interest rate environment that we are in. I mean, I would also say that we are in an interest rate environment in India that is unprecedented. Today, many conversations are about FDs are no longer cutting the bill. What do I do? Unfortunately, debt has taken the brunt of the pain predominantly from what's happened due to the illiquidity from mutual funds. So the question is, where else does one go? Real estate has been hard, though transactions in real estate in the last 3 months have been slightly better versus what you saw in the first quarter in 2020. And of course, many people are talking towards gold. So considering the interest rate environment that we are in, I do expect valuations to be expensive. It's not going to be cheap. COVID certainly has disrupted certain businesses. However, it's important to acknowledge that certain businesses have benefited as well. As a fund manager, our job is certainly not to mimic the index. We look at the index in order to benchmark ourselves against that because that's how we are measured as a fund. We're following the flows not just in India but US and China, and I think that is extremely relevant for investors in today's market. With this, I would like to wind up the presentation at our end, and we'd be happy to answer any specific questions both regarding the market to the best of our abilities as well as specific to the book.
Thank you, Naveen, for that update. So now I open the floor to questions. Any investor who has any questions can feel free to type your questions using the top left Q&A button. The identity of any investor asking questions is protected as the questions are visible only to the organizers.
The first question that I'll take is on the specialty chemical sector. Any views on the specialty chemical sector? It's a very interesting sector. I think there are huge number of tailwinds for this sector. Again, I always like to joke about this. I think chemicals has predominantly been a commodity business, right? For people who love their dosas, I have always uh, used this analogy that when you go to a restaurant, specialty chemicals is the difference that you pay up between a special butter dosa versus a normal butter dosa. You never know what is special about it, but there is something special about it. So today people are willing to pay up for it primarily because the tailwinds and the supply disruption that's happened from China. So we've spoken to quite a few players in the space, both in the listed and the unlisted space. There is, rightly or wrongly, significant amount of capex that is being done in the space because predominantly from many of the from the private players as well. When a certain business has free cash flow generation ability, and many of these specialty chemical sector players have delivered. Important thing is, if you look at a balance sheet of, let's say, SRF or any of the amines or any of the Navin Fluorines in the world, 5 6 years back, you will find a very very different balance sheet versus what you find today, and a lot of that has been aided by the free cash flow. Personally, I would say if someone was to invest in the specialty chemical space, pick the leaders because the tailwinds could last for the next few years. However, personally, at our portfolio level, we don't have any exposure to specialty chemicals. Predominantly because I mean, honestly speaking, I feel we've missed the boat. I don't have a better answer for that. I certainly believe that we missed the boat. There are people who invested and made a significant gain in starting 2014, 2015, but we've not invested in this space. Which sector do you find attractive right now, which is currently not covered in the portfolio? It's a very interesting question because I think as humans, we all have our biases, and so do I. What that means is I find telecom to be a very very interesting space. I think any sector where the marginal player has been bankrupted, with the competition being few and far between, with there is an inherent demand in that space, is always interesting. The only problem with telecom is the sector did not have any pricing power. And with whatever happened with Jio in the last 3 years between 16 and 19, clearly the pricing power was taken out of the equation and put in the hands of Jio. Now, with most of the marginal players being out of the equation, and you have two large players and one uh, hanging by their thread, the sector is certainly interesting. I would certainly look at Reliance. I mean, I've always been telling investors I don't understand the Reliance balance sheet. I think it's too complex. However, if people want to buy it as a momentum play, I think they can do it in their own individual portfolios. Very rarely in the Indian promoter landscape have I come across a single promoter who's actually said what he would do and done it to the T. And I think the Reliance promoter needs to be lauded for no matter what people say about him. He actually said something and he did it to the T in an environment that people could not fathom. So clearly the eyeballs are there. Clearly the momentum is there. And if someone wants to bet on that space, I would say Reliance is a company to hold. You will not, at least I can't get myself to buy it because I don't think I understand the balance sheet of the company. The follow-up question to that is, would I buy Bharati today? Again, it's a difficult question for me to answer because uh, I was commenting about telecom as a sector which has predominantly been capex intensive. You don't find telecom throwing up free cash flow. So it doesn't fit the bill, but still an interesting sector considering the dynamics of what's happened. And if I was to go into telecom, I would rather buy a Reliance than buy a Bharti. I do not want to buy a balance sheet with huge amount of debt. Reliance still, I still say that as a promoter, he's a master capital allocator. I would rather back a master capital allocator than a story. So I know there are a lot of fund managers who've been value players who picked Bharti as a value pick. I wouldn't go down that route personally. This there's one request on the presentation on Alchem Labs. Maggie, is the screen visible now?
Yes, Naveen. Yes, it's visible.
Okay. Okay. So I think the question is with regard to maintaining our exposure in financials. So this the genesis of that statement was in continuation to our last quarter, where we got a lot of feedback from both investors and partners saying the portfolio seems to have undue exposure in financials, where we had broken it down and explained what financials in India means. Just to recap, uh, unfortunately or fortunately, financials in India, we have private sector banks, we have public sector banks, we have NBFCs, we have non-lending financials where there is you don't lever up the balance sheet in order to be a financial player, which is predominantly either an insurance or an exchange-like business or a AMC-like business. So we had categorized and broken down our exposure in the previous quarter to say what is our exposure into private sector banks. We had zero exposure in PSUs and NBFCs, and the remaining exposure came either from exchanges or from insurance companies or from AMCs. And that's what I briefly touched upon when I said that we maintained our exposure in financials and we not trimmed it also. Uh, there's one more question about Indian Energy Exchange. So, what we're talking about and referring to there is for some of the portfolios that have cash, uh, we took on a smaller exposure in Indian Energy Exchange as one of our investments in this quarter. And the statement that I made was I see this as a potential possibility of a structural play in India if we are a bit more open towards deregulation, considering the fact that the business is proxy monopoly, so considering the fact that the return on capital employed is an obscene close to 70%, it is an exchange-like business. There are, I mean, operating in the power sector in India will always have its challenges. But I think uh, the business being operational for more than 12 years, I think many of the state governments and the discoms are now participants on the exchange. You will always hear the occasional headline saying one of the discoms setting up their own exchange. But I think there is enough and more evidence to say that it takes time to build a business like this. Just because you are one of the participants doesn't mean that you can come and inherently set up an exchange. Uh, there's a question on Muthoot Finance, and is this a unique bet in the NBFC space? And is Muthoot Finance attractive now? Personally, I have, again, this comes from an inherent bias. So I will caveat it because I am biased towards the space. I have looked at this space in the past between 2012 and 14. I have thought of Muthoot as a cyclical business. I have never thought of it as a structural business. Now, uh, we have been in the middle of a structural bull market in gold. I mean, if you leave the price action and the movement of gold in the last 2 years and look back at the price action in the last 10 years, uh, since the time Fed started its QE1 program in 2009, we've been in a structural bull market in gold. And through that bull market, Muthoot between 12 and 14 had its own problems but re-emerged. And I think today, if you look at many of the private sector banks, all of them suddenly seem to be setting up their own gold NBFCs and gold lending arms. I mean, I think setting up a lending operations is an easy part. focusing on collections and managing your NPAs through a leveraged business is the hard part. Again, this is a sector that is having tailwinds. Uh, I have always looked at a lending institution as a bet on the promoter because I don't believe hand on heart any analyst will understand a bank or a NBFC and can say that he can understand the granularity of the loan book with the deepest of conviction. So all you can do is bet on the promoter and bet on the risk controls that you set up. So with that, I would not own a Muthoot. However, again, it's become a popular bet today. So for me, the way I have looked at it, the way I have grown up, having seen a bankruptcy at close quarters with Lehman Brothers, I have come to the conclusion that one cannot hand on heart say that I understand a bank's balance sheet. It's impossible. So the only thing that you can do is to bet on the jockey and bet on the promoter. So, if someone is basically saying that they want to bet on Muthoot Finance, I would say that it's better endeavor to go and try and understand the jockey who's running it and the history behind it and the crisis that they went through between 11 and 14 to understand why I call it more of a cyclical business than a structural business. So long answer short, it is unique. There is a lot of money chasing the gold-backed NBFC space and the gold-backed lending institution today, but no, I would not bet on it. And when I say I would not bet on a certain space, it's being fully consciously aware that I could be wrong.
Thanks, Naveen. Okay, so there's another question.
Sure. Sure. So it's a very interesting question saying, has the crisis affected the thesis of any portfolio companies? Yes. The short answer is yes, and I'll explain that at greater length. And we covered a part of it in our March call. Also, has it provided an opportunity to churn or reallocate to new ideas? I think one of the things that we did well pre-crisis or pre-COVID, however you put it, was we had allocations to niche pharma companies. Like some of our companies, some of our portfolios had an exposure to another niche pharma company called Newland Laboratories. We always had an exposure to Syngene. Again, we bought a portfolio company called Alchem Labs this quarter, and all of that has stood up well. And I still feel that the exposure in these companies is not just COVID related. I look at it, the landscape certainly has changed in the last 5 years after distributor consolidation for the generics in the US. And I think a lot of that is changing for some of the generics too. So I look at pharma now as a structural play rather than just a COVID related play. One of the mistakes that we did early in this year was we had a small exposure to Delta Corp in the gambling space. And that obviously took a big hit in our portfolio. And we had trimmed down the exposure significantly to sub 1% going into March, towards the end of March. Though the business sees some amount of tailwinds from the online gambling space, I think the business from a core casino space has been disrupted. So yes, the thesis around Delta Corp was affected. We had trimmed it out and we took risk mitigation measures around going into March in the portfolios that own Delta Corp. I think the crisis has provided an increased opportunity to look at companies with free cash flows. I think we've been highlighting companies on free cash flow generation ability all through last year and the prior year. It was less appreciated then, and it is more appreciated today. So, towards that aspect, I think we've not churned much in the portfolio. Our portfolio companies remain. What is to see is how does our top exposure in HDFC Bank react going towards the end of this year. I think we are going to see a lot of headlines, right, from moratorium extensions or any kind of Supreme Court ruling on interest, whether that needs to get paid or not. And specifically with respect to HDFC Bank, what happens to Aditya Puri, though I personally consider that as a non-event. I'm not sure that the market will. So I think that is an exposure that I would monitor. to see if the growth effect and the growth pace comes through the way I expect it to. Apart from that, we've always had an exposure to the AMC business. Most people and most investors have looked at it as an expensive business, rightly so. And I think I personally don't believe that. I still see a lot of tailwinds in the business, predominantly from the distribution angle coming through. And that's business that we would likely closely like to monitor before making a comment on how it performs in the next few quarters. So long story short, yes, the prices has affected our pieces, but at the same time, we are not churning. We have allocated to new ideas where cash is presented itself, where we're building up positions, not in size, but we're building it up slowly. But we've not churned anything yet. Sure. So we have looked at consumption-related stocks. Our consumption-related thesis predominantly was played out through ITC. It initially hurt in the portfolio. I still think that there could be a decent amount of headwind from ITC from a capital allocation perspective. You would really I think most investors in India, if they call themselves value investors, would have ITC in the portfolio. I would want to see a few things pick up from ITC, uh, especially in the FMCG business and the operational leverage come through. If that doesn't come through in the next, let's say, 1 to 1.5 years, then I would be flexible enough to change my view. Yes, consumer businesses offer great defensibility in the portfolio. However, I think it's a question of getting it at the right valuation as well, where there is growth. Today, you have one set of consumer facing businesses which are priced extremely expensive. So you can't have a thesis saying that we are going through a consumption driven crisis because there is lack of credit on the ground, but I will pay up to own an Asian Paints and Nestle. I mean, both of these arguments in my mind at least doesn't gel. So in our portfolio, we wouldn't own an Asian Paints and Nestle, not because there's anything problematic with the company. It's just that the valuations are too expensive for us to get comfortable with. But if there are consumption-driven companies that are available at the right valuation, we wouldn't mind paying up for it. I mean, I certainly am of the belief that you're not going to get a consumption-driven company at a 20 PE in this market. But if at the right valuation, we are required to pay up for a business that we understand will surely pay up. At the moment, I don't find any.
Thanks, Naveen, for that. As there are no more questions, we wind up the session. The recording of this webinar will be sent out once it's made available. Once again, I thank you all for your patience on the call. Have a nice evening.